Fabio, thank you so much for joining us here once again on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. How are you?
I'm really great, thank you. Thank you, Matt. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Fabio. Fabulous. Your beard is looking still fabulous and luxurious for those of you who are listening.
Now, Fabio, we have just the September issue of the Science of Psychotherapy magazine. We've just released an article of yours, and it's the 7 elements for optimal outcomes in psychotherapy, field work results. And we thought it would be a fantastic opportunity for us to get the man himself in front of the microphone and talk about, flesh out some of the details of this article.
Oh, yes, I'm really glad to share some insights from this research. I liked it very much. On 2 levels. One is the topic itself, effectiveness, practical integration for daily practice of the therapist, not for the theory's sake. And so it was amazing to do something practical in this way. The other level was how we have carried on this research, because we had different ways to manage everything. So we used the classical self-reports from patients and therapists, but also hard sciences such as cortisol levels, testosterone levels, HRV. That is a really simple and powerful tool, heart rate variability, to monitor our stress response in the body immediately and also in the long run.
Yeah, this is what I love about your process. I mean, you're not just doing these sort of self-reports and that, you're actually getting cortisol levels, you're getting vagal tone and heart rate variability and all of these very medical sounding variables. And that's amazing. And I want to know by the end of our discussion today, just what sort of changes you are finding out are happening physiologically.
I'll just do just a real quick rundown because,
right,
my language, I mean, you could do it, but if I just do it quickly, Fabio, cortisol levels are looking at, it's a biomarker for stress levels. High cortisol is an increased stress level, low cortisol is a lower stress level. There's EEGs, or there's various things you're doing there as well. But heart rate variability, it's something that people hear a lot, and I'm not sure they appreciate it. Sometimes I think they think it's fast heartbeat and slow heartbeat. Clearly, if you're relaxed, you're going to have a slower heartbeat, and if you're active, you're going to have a higher heartbeat. But that's not heart rate variability. It's the amount of time, and it's usually in milliseconds, between 2 equal points, and usually what they do it is on the peak of the heartbeat. And what you want, what is healthy, is if there's a slightly different amount of time between these peaks, maybe 780 milliseconds, then 820, then 760, then 810, and this variation. So having a very even, and you can't tell this by taking your pulse, you have to use a machine to do this, but having a very, very equal pulse is actually a body that is not comfortable. It is a body that is over-regulating itself, and the vagal tone, the vagal frame is distorted. So there you go. That's just a quick one for everybody.
Oh yes, perfect. In fact, it's important to understand this kind of concept. In fact, I used to say that heart rate variability is about flexibility of our adaptation response, and it is as much as important as our flexibility in the mind. So, and they are connected, of course. There is a lot of science behind heart rate variability and stress response in our brain and our mind. So, it's really important, this point. And another another relevation we use a lot was to analyze the video footages of different sessions. This was very powerful to increase the awareness of the therapist. It's not something new, but it's something forgotten. Also in the 70s, in the 80s, in some, not in all psychotherapy trainings, we used video recordings to improve our awareness of ourselves as a therapist, and in the quick responses of our client patients that we are not aware of because we are too much into the real situation. And so this was really interesting to find some indicators of which technique, which passages were more effective, but also on the relation, to work on the relation of both of them and identify something really interesting. One of the 7 factor was about naturalness, on be spontaneous on the situation. That is something that we already know as a concept, but it's really hard to put in practice. It's a paradox. Be natural, be spontaneous, and everyone is freezed.
Yes, it's interesting. We used to do a lot of this stuff when I was in acting school, of course, and I still love looking at sort of slow motion of actors. But it is something that therapists can do. Look at a performance that feels really natural, then watch it over and over and over to do it, and then those performances that aren't very good, which is because they're not natural, because the actor is not skillful in letting it through. And you can learn a lot by watching those things. That's just a little something I was thinking about when I was editing the article.
Now, look, we want to jump into these 7 key elements, but before we do, let's put people in the picture. So you took 134 people was your sample size, which is a fair sample size. And how long did this study take? How long were you doing this study for?
This study was 1 year long, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
It involved more than 130 therapists, and each therapist applied this kind of study and all the relevation on from 5 to 10 patients all along this year. So it was quite huge. More than 1,000 patients were studied.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we have done periodically evaluation, not just at the end, because it was important to see the starting point, the end of the therapy, but of course something in between to understand what was going, if we were going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. For this reason, it's a field study. We adjusted our relevation, the number of the session, the timing of the process every 1-2 months to have a perfect result and more consistent results at the end of the year.
Okay, so it was very much an evolving process as you went along over the year. Yeah.
Yes, of course, it was necessary to have coherent results. And this was the process. We already mentioned what we have measured. What we have asked for to the therapist was to take their patients and find 2 groups. One of them, with one of them, they were asked to use their classical approach. We had the therapist with different trainings, so EMDR, CBT, hypnosis, and so half of the group was treated with their traditional skill sets and approach and methodologies.
Sometimes I think we often call it treatment as usual. is what's sometimes used in American papers. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, perfect.
And then
with the other half, they were invited to use their approaches as well, the treatment as well, but introducing some of our techniques that we have developed in with the Integrative Sciences Hub. And there are a lot, so there are mind techniques, emotional regulation techniques, and so on. I will give you some example later discussing the results. And so we could compare the difference, what this kind of techniques can bring in and improve or change the results. Sometimes the results were different, sometimes were similar, but in a shorter time. And I think this is quite important today. I work often with some school of psychotherapy here in Italy, and sometimes with a seminar in Europe. And one I noticed, but I think it's a worldwide this way, the young psychotherapists prefer to make long therapy because they have more time, they have a guarantee for income. But when you become more experienced, you prefer to have a brief, longer for the perfect time needed for the patients, not for you as a therapist and for other reasons. And so sometimes we've noticed that the therapy has similar results, but it was shorter, and at the end of the second year, they have more long-lasting results.
So that's what I think is one of the important things about the work you do, the what you call it, an amplification, but it's really, I think of it in the term of an enzyme in microbiology. What it does is it activates and amplifies and accelerates the process, and this is really important because actually we've done work with another Italian whose name's Flavio. Very confusing, Fabio and Flavio, but who does work with single session therapy along with Michael Hoyt in America. And when he did the study with Kaiser Permanente, they found that the vast majority of people who attended did only attend for one session. So heightening and amplifying and accelerating the effectiveness, not just accelerating the process, but the effectiveness of the process is what is so, well, amongst other things, but that's what excites me about the work that you do. You've got a thing, you just do a little, what seems like a bibbly-bobbly activity, and bam, it's spectacular. That's the unscientific description, Matt. Perhaps you could go back to I think it's more than a bibbly-bobbly. So yeah, back to you, Matt.
Okay, so the main variable we're looking at here is therapy as usual compared with more of these integrative approaches which you've been developing. Now, but there are a lot of different variables, isn't there? When we talk about the variable of the client themselves and the therapist, and regardless of what the therapy is, I mean, there's an awful lot of variability just in the therapist and the client, right? So how are you taking that into account?
Okay, of course, there are a lot of differences. I think we can take it into account starting with a broader approach, and we have found out 2-3 interesting ways to work on that. One, I love to call it constructing a wider mental space shared by the therapist and the patient. Mm-hmm. And for doing that, we have used, first of all, a different approach about how the initial evaluation is going on. I love complexity. I think we have to manage to deal with all the complexity of the humans. And so we have elaborated different models, such as the switches that goes from the cell to the brain networks to the muscles we engage in stress responses and so on. And it's a lot to take into account for the therapist itself, even if is trained in this kind of approach. So we have tried to suggest to the therapist to share maps, schemas. Also, I personally use a huge flip chart in my sessions, and I used to draw these schemes to share other schemes on the iPad. And we have noticed that this kind of approach relax and make the therapist more natural, because you don't have to do too much mental effort to keep all in mind. And it's even more, it is useful for the patients, because they think, wow, this is a huge approach. I have a lot to a lot is going to be explored, taken into consideration. So the trust is raising in the approach and in the therapist, and also the patients can follow the process. And sometimes they bring at home their the paper sheets, they take a picture of these schemes and keep going the process in between the sessions. So this is a mental way to, and that every therapist can do, no matter the approach the models is practicing. It can be really useful.
Now we've got a couple of those images in the article,
Yes, of course.
haven't we? But of course, then in the book you've got you've got a lot more of so where people can see this, and this is what's so lovely about the work. I mean, you need to have some training and understanding, and you do training certainly in Italy to understand it more, but you can get a grasp of that. So even in the article, so I advise everybody to go in and say, wow, that's a really good little tool to use.
And let me just reiterate that as we relieve ourselves from that cognitive load of trying to regurgitate, the theoretical aspect, then we're freeing up, more of our cognition.
As the therapist,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
so these tools are very, very, very practical, and I would encourage people to lean on them. It doesn't, just because you have a flip chart or you're making reference, to something, doesn't mean that you don't know what you're doing. It actually, you're just relieving yourself of a certain amount of cognitive load, so that you can use your brain in better, more flexible ways.
And as Fabio said, expanding the framework for the clients able to experience. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes, perfect. And Richard, you mentioned the trainings and the books. The books, of course, is in English too, as well as the website, and also in the blog session we have many articles with other schemes the listener can go and look at. So they will find some more example of this kind of sheets of approaches. And talking about releasing mental tension to use better the brain, and talking about mind-body integration, another useful factor is about releasing body tension. This is something the actors Richard mentioned before do a lot, and to do this we have taken a lot of information from a discipline called biomechanics that is not usually known by the psychotherapist, but it's really, really interesting, because it is exactly the opposite, because it evaluates the body, the biomechanical movement of the muscles, with no brain. So we are sure that we are going back to the perfect physiology if we respect this kind of schemes of movement. And one very important effective system is to disengage the response of our muscles. We all are trained in diaphragmatic breathing, and it's extremely powerful. Biomechanics teaches us that the diaphragm is linked with the abdominal rectus, that is the muscle from the sternum here to near the genitals, to not properly, but to give an example. And this muscle, the abdomen, is an antagonist of the diaphragm. So to relax the diaphragm and breathe freely, we have to relax as well the abdomen. So it's interesting that the so-called belly breathing in reality use it a lot. And we can do an opposite breathing with disengaging these muscles. So we train the therapist to do this technique himself, then to teach it to the patients, and this gives a really a powerful enhancement to all the body works that follows. Yeah. A sort of enzyme that you can put at the beginning of the reactions, and then if you do sensory motor, if you do polyvagal application by the abdomen, everything is more powerful and faster because you have released this antagonist of all the other movement. And not only, it's a really huge way to put your body in a natural way. We have looked at, as I was saying before, we analyzed a lot of video footages from the sessions, and we noticed that as soon as the therapist releases this kind of muscles, his face changed, and obviously the face of the client changes immediately. They are well connected. They are not on defense.
And I bet last week we were talking about genetic expression and epigenetic changes, and I'm pretty sure that there would be some epigenetic changes here. Absolutely,
it all just happens. It's just a matter of what we're able to look at.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, Fabio, that this idea of using breathing as a beginning, as a central framework, is something that it's only lack of knowledge, and it's also this linear type of thinking, not thinking in systems, because you've brought up there the diaphragm connected to the muscles. So like you don't have a diaphragm that moves up and down in the body that's just doing that independently, like nobody knows. But it's connected certainly to those muscles. Now, another thing, just quickly mentioning, although you talk about it more in other areas, but the fascia, which is a strengthening or a strength mechanism that goes in very large sheets right around the whole body. So we have that's operating on the neck muscles and the head muscles. Then, of course, we've got the vagus, the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's just wonderful. Mainly what I'm sort of pointing out here is that few things that you said there. There's this magnificent tree of this web of activity that you can do one element, which is just to breathe in appropriate fashions, and you can trigger all those. Equally, you can change your facial expressions, and that will trigger other things. So and you do this in many ways, because that's another thing, Fabio, that you have different exercises that it's kind of like poking the bear at different points.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if you ever been in Italy. We have a very famous cheeses, and one cheese is the Grana Padano, Parmigiano Reggiano. You know, that to rake on the pasta, and this is huge, and all the border is very, very strong. You can't cut with a single knife. So the artisans have a lot of very small knives but maybe 20, 30 knives for a cheese, and they put all these knives all along the crust, and then just moving the one in the middle, it opens. Very easily, no effort. And of course, I think of my techniques as these small, these small knives. You can take the problem, give a little stimulus that are engaging, are not stressful. Sometimes they are also funny because playing with the body, with the mind, with emotion is very funny, interesting. We are also, I mentioned in the article, we use also subliminal stimuli with an app that we share free. So I can give you the link for the listeners so they can try themselves to use the same subliminal stimuli that we use in neuroscience research to evocate subconscious fear. So you are not aware of, I have seen nothing, but you really have seen something you are afraid of. And the funny thing is that this kind of practice in the lab is something very medical. In the clinical setting is something weird because the patients feel activations, but it can't realize why. Is excited because we are used to think about working on phobias, on negative activation, but we can work also on positive activation, on something exciting such as riding a motorbike, playing the piano, and activating it at a non-conscious level. It's very interesting because the person can feel that there is a lot of emotion blocked and moving in himself, and he has just to know how to trigger.
And yes, that's so fascinating. We're just touching here on all the Joseph Ledoux stuff that and Richard Brown talking about higher order representations and higher order representations of the representations. This ability to have a stimulus that we're not consciously aware of that's affecting our state, but then the nature of the way that we go about making it consciously aware. And this is actually the work that your program does, which is so wonderful.
Yes, in fact, I deeply inspire my work to Ledoux's framework, but it is huge, and trying to put it into the daily practice. And I think it's very, very effective. And it's a different ways to engage. And going back to the therapeutic alliance, it's something that the patient doesn't expect, but he accepts very well and is surprised, and he wants to keep doing something like that, very interactive, very pragmatical in his sessions, not just talking.
Now, Fabio, one of the things that you touched on, which I would like to hear again from you, we've talked about this when you've had you on the show before, and that's inflammation. Now, we know that inflammation underpins so much disease, and it's very, very important. And you've got it here as key number 7. Can you just give us a little bit of insight into what you've continued to discover about inflammation?
Oh, yes, of course. Inflammation is a very important and basilar factor. In fact, as you said, inflammation is at the basis of many different diseases. It's famous in the psychotherapy domain, most of all for PTSD. They discover that they have a huge inflammation in the amygdala or in other brain structures. But of course, this is true for anxiety, chronic stress, depression. Inflammation is overwhelming all these kind of diseases with different components, but something often recurring. And the important thing is that the inflammation can be eased by everything is anti-inflammatory. It's quite simple, but we have to know. that there are a lot of research with the chemical anti-inflammatory. The most common one is the aspirin. And there are studies, very interesting, that if you take a little amount of aspirin and you try to do the same therapy, maybe pharmaceutical or psychotherapy as well, for a resistant form of depression, after 2-3 weeks of aspirin, the therapy works better.
And that's
So
just a
the
small
resistance,
amount of aspirin, isn't it? That
very
you're saying,
small, very small,
just
less
enough to.
less than the medical level.
So it's not about medicating and doing something. It's
No,
just about changing the conditions, isn't it? Yeah.
And Richard, this is
it's called a stimulus medicine, because it's not a real medicine. It's giving just a stimulus to our organism. But the most important thing is that we don't have just medication, because I know that in the USA, some psychotherapists can prescribe low-level drugs, but here in Italy, no, you can't prescribe anything. I don't know in Australia if you can prescribe something. No. But the important element is that it's not necessary. We, as a psychotherapist, can suggest, prescribe in another way, but suggest to do physical activity. Aerobic physical activity is just powerful as the small amount of aspirin. So in just 20 minutes a day, you don't have to be a performer, a great sportsman. No, just 20 minutes a day of walking fast, not running, walking fast. And the other huge, even more the physical activity, but synergistic with that, is the nutrition. If we eat less sugars, less processed food that are rich in glutamate, sugar and glutamate are very, very inflammatory foods. Especially in young people and kids, sometimes if you reduce this kind of food, you see a big improvement in attention, in mood regulation, even without the psychotherapy. The psychotherapy can come later and fix everything it's needed to fix, but the hyperactivation always often with the kids is related to the food. For the elder I mean over 20 years old, so not old, but after 20 years old, we are quite as well compromised, someone more, someone less. So we have to reduce these foods, take some natural supplements, omega-3, that is good for brain plasticity, and we know brain plasticity is not good also for inflammation, but is good for memory consolidation, for plasticity in thinking. And so we have different advantages with this kind of supplements. And after a while, but sometimes it's enough 1 or 2 months of changing our nutrition style and supplements, then we can eliminate all the supplements and have a healthy lifestyle, and our brain is not more inflamed.
And this is so important. I just think the B vitamin groups are, of course,
Yes.
important in that, particularly for methylation, which I've been studying furiously recently. But this idea that because I talk about this, getting from this damaged sort of diffracting sort of brain state into a therapeutic state, needs sometimes this creating health. And I can imagine that some people would take the diets and do the exercise, and they would actually then be better able to solve the problems themselves. But they're also probably in a better state for the therapy? Is that it's more effective when they've gotten their bodies a little bit more into these alignments that you're talking about?
Yes, it's a bidirectional, the effect. So you can improve the way you feel, just changing how you eat. But of course, if it is in a psychotherapy process, you are reconsidering everything. So you are taking care of yourself. So food is just a part of it, but it's a synergistic. What are you doing? And going back to the beginning, if you start explaining this process. This process is just at the beginning when you collect information from the patients. You don't have to explain everything, but just put hints so he can think about it and say, okay, if I take care of my body, my mind, everything together, it's good. I was surprised that I found a research from the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, that already 20 years ago in the US, the 30% of the psychotherapists used to give physical information to their patients, and sometimes to go on the field with them. So sometimes they take lunch together as part of the therapies. They are not becoming friends, but is a way to teach them practically how to eat. And I think this is something even more powerful, this well-known mindful eating, because mindful eating is 90% about mindfulness and 10 about food. Here is the opposite. We are talking about the importance of food, but in learning how to eat, how to appreciate food, how to choose, and what is better than give the right example? And so I'm not saying that we have all the times to eat with our patients, but we can consider these, or we can find a way to pragmatically talk about that. So, okay, give me the list of your typical breakfast, your typical lunches, and then we can discuss how to change, what to change, and then in the psychotherapy, talk about feelings, expectation, feeling of at the beginning. I've experienced that fasting, just jumping the breakfast, is a huge problem, a huge mental problem, not a bodily problem, because when you awake in the morning, you have ghrelin hormone very low, and this ghrelin asking for food. So if you bypass the emotional feeling of void, I need to eat, I need to put something because it's a well-established habits, or for many other reasons, you can think you have something to work on in psychotherapy, but you are also creating healthy habits. So you are doing this double work with one
process. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, there we are, Matt. I think there. What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking this is such fundamentally important information. I would hope that in the future, with our kids at school, that they are told, hey, you're a complex system, and here's the user's manual. Now, learn a lot of these things that we're talking about right now from the get-go. But of course, we don't sort of teach hardly any of this in school. We wait until, we are in trouble, and then people like Fabio come to the rescue. But it would be it would be great to see this information filtered down and become the basis of some of our education.
Well, we will. That's a real positive essence to work for, and the realization that I think, looking at Fabio's work and how much you have brought forward, that we are we keep thinking we've figured everything out, but we haven't. Now we're, instead of figuring out the elements, now we're bringing them all together. I think this is the time of integrating and understanding how to integrate. And you, Fabio, are absolutely a world leader in this activity.
Yeah.
And now we probably need to wind up, I think, Matt, because we're sort of, it's too exciting, but we know people sort of run out of time. So what do you think?
Yeah, look, everyone will be able to glean a lot by going to the links that we'll put in the show notes. So Fabio's going to point you to some specific things on his website that you can go to, get some information. It will be worth your while to go and check out this information. But yes, run out of time. Fabio, any final words before we wrap up?
Oh, I just want to focus the last words from Richard. I think, yes, my invite is to start integrating. A lot of people just study, start integrating, find a framework to do that. It's useful to have a framework, to not have too many information. Oh, today I do this, tomorrow I do that. It's not effective. Just do a little bit of something every day, and of course we have a lot to discover, and we will. But if we start, we have a starting point to work on. So yes, everyone can start do this thing, enjoy the conversation. We're doing in the last month, and I will keep monthly webinars about that with a final discussion. So I will put a link also to that in the show notes. So whoever wants to join us in this discussion can do it.
Okay, brilliant.
Fantastic. And Matt and I would be there more often. We get it every now and again, but we're busy. but there's wonderful stuff for everybody. And in Italian, if you're in Europe, in English, Fabio looks after all these things. And as we've got another couple of friends in Italy, and we keep saying your English is much, much better than our Italian.
Okay,
That's right.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I would to improve furthermore my English, but thank you for your appreciation.
I'm always astounded at people that speak many languages. So for now, Fabio, we're going to have to say goodbye. But everybody will have Fabio on again. There'll be plenty of new things and extended work. So we look forward to seeing you again.
Brilliant.
It will be a pleasure, and I will be available every time you wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.